The moment I remember most clearly is not the worst one. The worst one came later, when the room had gone so quiet you could hear the ice shifting in the water glasses, when 23 people were looking at me with the particular expression that says, "We always knew this about you." When the woman at the head of the table said the thing she had been building toward all evening with the patience of someone who had planned this and enjoyed the planning. But the moment I remember most clearly is the one just before all of that. The moment when I was still okay. When I was standing outside the restaurant on Newbury Street in Boston on a Friday evening in October, looking at my reflection in the dark glass of the door, adjusting the collar of my coat and telling myself, "You can do this, Naomi. You have survived harder rooms than this one." I believed myself. That was the last time I believed myself for the next 3 hours. My name is Naomi Grace Washington. I am 34 years old. I was married for 4 years to a man named Derek Harrington, and the divorce was final 14 months before the evening I am about to describe to you. And in those 14 months, I had done the specific work of rebuilding a life that had been partially dismantled, which is different from building a life from scratch, because when you build from scratch, you have the energy of beginning. But when you rebuild, you have the memory of what used to be there and the grief of its absence, and you have to work around both of those things simultaneously. I had done that work. I had an apartment I loved in the South End. I had my job, which was senior project manager at a mid-size architecture firm where I had worked for 6 years, and where my work was excellent and recognized. I had my friends, my church, my Saturday morning runs along the Charles River. I had rebuilt carefully and with intention, and I was, by the evening of October 12th, genuinely okay. Not performing okay. Actually okay. Which is why what happened that night cut as deep as it did. But I need to tell you how I got to that restaurant before I tell you what happened inside it, because the how matters enormously to the why, and the why is everything. Derek Harrington came from the kind of Boston family that announces itself before it arrives. Old money, old name, old opinions about who belonged in certain rooms and who was there by invitation only, and what the difference was between those two things. His mother, Patricia Harrington, was the kind of woman who had been beautiful once and had transitioned seamlessly into being formidable instead, trading one kind of power for another without apparent loss. His father, Gerald, had the easy warmth of a man who had never once had to wonder if he was liked, which made the warmth feel less like a gift and more like a performance of generosity that cost him nothing. I met Derek at a professional event. He was charming and specific, and he looked at me the way men look at you when they are fully present, which is rarer than it should be and more powerful than it sounds. He pursued me with the focused intensity of someone who had decided and was implementing the decision. I was 28. I was impressed by the focus, and I mistook it for love, and that mistake was the beginning of everything that followed. We dated for 2 years. He was attentive and thoughtful in the ways that are visible and less so in the ways that only become apparent over time. He never said anything directly unkind about my family, which was from Mattapan and was working class and was everything the Harringtons were not. but he never fully brought me into his family either, which I noticed and explained away with the reasonable explanations you give yourself when you want something to work. We got engaged. I should tell you about the engagement because it matters. He proposed at a private dinner, just the two of us, with a ring that was beautiful and a speech that was rehearsed in the best way, the way you rehearse something when you want to get it right. I said yes, and I meant it. I loved him. I want to be clear about that. The love was real even when everything built on top of it wasn't. Patricia Harrington's response to the engagement was a phone call to Derek that I was not supposed to hear and did hear, through the wall of our apartment, in which she said things that I am going to tell you plainly because I think you can handle plain. She said that she had nothing against Naomi personally, but that she had hoped Derek would make a choice that reflected the family's standing and history, and that this choice was going to require some management. I am not going to tell you what word she used for me in that conversation, because I have not given that word space in my life since the day I understood it was being used. Derek told me about the call later. He softened it. He said his mother was from a different generation and she would come around. He said the important thing was that he had made his choice and his choice was me. I believed him. Second mistake. The 4 years of our marriage are a story I could tell in detail but won't, not completely, because it is not the story I am here to tell today. What I will tell you is the shape of it, which is the shape of a woman slowly learning that the room she has been invited into does not actually have space for her, that the invitation was genuine but the space was not, and that the difference between those two things is where the damage lives. Patricia ran the Harrington family with the precision of a CEO and the warmth of a board resolution. She planned the holidays, the events, the social calendar, the dinners where the important people came, and where the family presented itself as the family it believed itself to be. These dinners happened 6, 8 times a year at the Harrington family home in Chestnut Hill, a house that had been in the family for 40 years and that smelled like money and old wood and the specific cold of rooms that are maintained rather than lived in. I was present at these dinners. I want to be clear, I was present. I sat at that table. I ate that food. I participated in those conversations. But presence is not the same as belonging, and belonging was the thing that was always just slightly withheld, like a door that is open but has a draft coming through it that tells you the warmth is not entirely for you. Patricia addressed me less than she addressed everyone else. Not never, never would have been a declaration, and Patricia did not make declarations when she could make adjustments instead. She addressed me less, included me in fewer conversations, asked my opinion on fewer topics, laughed at my contributions slightly less completely than she laughed at others. These are small things. They are the kinds of things that are impossible to prove and maddening to experience, and that a woman like Patricia knew exactly how to deploy because she had been deploying them her entire life. Derek's sister, Melissa, was Patricia's primary instrument. Melissa was 31, unmarried, with her mother's precision and her father's social ease, and a specific gift for the comment that sounds like an observation but lands like a verdict. She commented on my hair twice. She commented on my clothing choices 3 times. She commented on my family background once, very subtly, in a way that she could have denied if challenged, and that she knew I would not challenge because challenging it would have made me the difficult one. I was not the difficult one. I was the quiet one, the smiling one, the one who brought excellent hostess gifts and wrote thank you notes and arrived on time and left gracefully and never made a scene, because making a scene was what they were waiting for, because making a scene would have confirmed what they already believed about me. I understood the game. I played it for 4 years. And then the marriage ended and the game changed, and I thought I was done playing it. I was wrong. The divorce was Derek's doing. I want to say that not with bitterness, but with accuracy. He came to me on a Sunday morning in August, and he told me he had been unhappy for a while, and that he had been talking to someone about it, and that he thought we had come as far as we could together. He said it carefully and with rehearsed kindness, and I sat across from him in our kitchen, and I listened, and I felt the ground under my life shift. I did not beg. I did not perform the kind of desperation that people sometimes perform in these moments because they think it will change the outcome. I understood in the kitchen that Sunday morning that the outcome had been decided before the conversation, that this was not a negotiation but a notification, and that the most important thing I could do was receive the notification with my full self intact. I said, "Okay," I said, "I think we should talk to a lawyer separately." I said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." He looked at me like he had expected something different. I know now that he had expected a scene because a scene would have made the story cleaner. A scene would have been confirmation of the thing his family had always privately believed, that I was not quite the right fit, that the invitation had been a mistake, that the management Patricia had prescribed had been necessary. I did not give him a scene. The divorce was clean. We had a prenuptial agreement, drafted by Harrington family lawyers, which protected the Harrington assets comprehensively. I received what was specified and nothing more, which was fair in the legal sense, and specifically designed to be fair in the legal sense while being something else in the human sense. I took what was mine, and I left, and I built my South End apartment and my rebuilt life, and I did not look back. For 14 months, I did not look back. And then Derek called. He called on a Wednesday afternoon. His voice was the same voice, which always surprises me when people's voices stay the same after everything has changed, as though the voice hasn't received the update. He said he wanted to talk. He said he had been thinking about things. He said he missed me and he thought he had made a mistake, and he wanted to know if there was any possibility of, he paused here, clearly having rehearsed up to this point and now improvising, of talking about things. I was sitting at my desk at work. I had a meeting in 20 minutes. I said, "Derek, we have been divorced for 14 months. He said, "I know, I wanted to say it. I needed to know if there was a door open." I said, "I'm seeing someone." This was true. I had been seeing someone for 4 months, a man I will tell you about shortly because he is the reason this story goes where it goes. But at that point in the phone call, he was simply true information and also, I admit, a useful thing to be able to say. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is it serious?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh," I said, "I wish you well, Derek, I genuinely do." And I hung up and went to my meeting, and I thought that was the end of it. The following Friday, I received an invitation. Printed on Harrington family stationery, the thick cream kind with the embossed crest, which meant Patricia's office because Patricia still sent paper invitations in the 21st century as a statement about what kind of family the Harringtons were. The invitation was to a dinner. The occasion was described as Derek's 38th birthday celebration, a dinner for family and close friends at Mason Laurent, which was one of the best restaurants in Boston, the kind with a waiting list and a sommelier who remembered your preferences and a prix-fixe menu that cost more than my first month's rent in my first apartment. I was on this list. I read the invitation 3 times trying to understand why I was on this list. The answer, which I did not arrive at until later, was Patricia. Patricia had put me on this list with a specific purpose that was not celebration and not reconciliation, and not any of the things a reasonable person might assume. Patricia had put me on this list the way a director puts an actor in a scene, because she needed me present for something she had planned. I did not know this. I went. Here is why I went, because I know you are wondering. I went because my therapist had been telling me for months that I needed to stop organizing my life around avoiding the Harringtons. That avoidance was a form of power I was giving them, and that the healthiest thing was to be able to walk into any room without it costing me something. I went because I had rebuilt myself, and I wanted to prove to myself that the rebuilding was solid. I went because I was genuinely okay, and I thought my genuine okayness was armor enough. I also, if I am being completely honest, went because Marcus had said I should go. Marcus Cole was the someone I had mentioned to Derek on the phone, the man I had been seeing for 4 months. I will tell you about him properly now because he is the axis around which this story turns. I met Marcus at a charity auction in June. He had outbid me on a piece of art, a small sculpture by a local artist that I had fallen in love with the moment I saw it, and when he won the bid, he had turned around and looked directly at me and said, "I'm sorry. You wanted that one." I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Because you stopped breathing when the bidding started." I had looked at him. He was tall, dark-suited, with the kind of face that is not immediately handsome so much as immediately present, the kind that takes you a moment to realize has been looking at you with complete attention and has been doing so since you came into the room. He bought the sculpture. Then he came and found me at the cocktail hour and said, "I'd like to give this to you. The sculpture, if you'll have dinner with me." I said, "That's an unusual approach." He said, "I'm an unusual person." We had dinner that Sunday. He gave me the sculpture, which is now on my bookshelf in my South End apartment and which I look at every morning while I drink my coffee. He was direct and funny and genuinely curious about things in a way that felt like a specific kind of intelligence, the kind that is interested in the world rather than in the performance of being interested in the world. He did not tell me what he did for work on the first date. This is a thing I noticed and did not push. He said he worked in investment and development, and when I asked him to be more specific, he smiled in a way that meant he was going to be more specific on his own timeline, and not because I pushed. By the 2nd month, I knew more. By the 3rd month, I knew the full picture, and I had to sit with it, because the full picture was large, and I had some very specific feelings about large pictures given my recent history. Marcus Cole was, by any conventional measure, extraordinarily wealthy. He had built a real estate development and investment company from almost nothing, beginning with one property in Atlanta when he was 26 and scaling with the focused and patient intelligence that was simply the way he approached everything. His company, Cole Development Group, had properties in 7 cities. He had been on the covers of things. He was the kind of wealthy that had its own gravity. He had not led with any of this. He had led with himself, which I had found disorienting and then deeply appealing. We had a conversation about it in month 3. I said, "You know, I have some complicated feelings about wealth and what it means in relationships." He said, "I know. I've been paying attention." I said, "That sounds like something a wealthy person says to manage a situation." He had looked at me with a completely unbothered expression and said, "It sounds like something a person who pays attention says." You'll decide which one I am on your own timeline. I had decided. Mostly. I was still deciding, in the way you continue to decide when something matters enough to keep examining. He knew about the Harrington marriage. I had told him in month 2 all of it, the whole shape of it, and he had listened with the focused attention that was his signature and had not said anything that was not useful. He had said, "You spent 4 years in a room that was trying to be smaller than you." He said, "That's a specific kind of tired." He said, "You don't look tired anymore." When the dinner invitation arrived and I told him about it, he had said, "Go." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you should be able to walk into any room in this city and belong there. And right now you're not sure you can do that in a room with those people, so go find out." I said, "You make it sound simple." He said, "It's not simple. But you're not small, Naomi. Stop letting them make you practice being small." I went, "I am going to take you into that restaurant now, and I need you to stay close, because the next part of this story is the part that required everything I had." Mason Laurent was on Newberry Street. I had been there once before for a work celebration, and I remembered it as the kind of place where the lighting was perfect, and the service was invisible, and everything was arranged to make the people who could afford to be there feel that their presence was the point of the exercise. I arrived at 7:15, which was the time on the invitation. The hostess took my coat. I smoothed the front of my dress, which was dark green silk, fitted, the dress I wore when I needed to feel like my best self, and I followed the hostess to the private dining room in the back where the Harrington party was assembled. 23 people. I had not expected 23 people. I had expected a small dinner, family and close friends as the invitation said, which I had interpreted as 12, maybe 15. 23 was not a small dinner. 23 was an audience. I walked into that room and I registered faces in the way that you register threat. Quickly, involuntarily, your body doing the calculation before your mind has processed the information. Patricia at the head of the long table, in a dress the color of expensive winter, her hair perfect, a smile on her face that had nothing warm in it. Gerald beside her, with his performed warmth, which he aimed at me in a practiced arc as I entered. Melissa near the center of the table, next to a man I didn't recognize, already watching me with the specific alertness of someone waiting for a scene to begin. Derek at the far end, who looked up when I entered and had an expression I could not fully read discomfort, something else, something that might have been warning if I had been paying closer attention. And the rest of the table. Harrington cousins and family friends and people I had met at previous dinners, and people I had never seen, all of them arranged around that table like a production. I found my place card, Naomi Washington, my maiden name, which I had gone back to after the divorce. Set midway down the table, between a cousin of Derek's, whose name I could not immediately recall, and an empty seat. I sat. The empty seat beside me was noted but not explained. The dinner began. The first hour was almost normal. I say almost because I was watching carefully, and what I was watching was the architecture of the evening. The way conversations were rooted around me rather than to me, the way my attempts to contribute were received with the specific half-attention that is not quite rudeness, but is not quite the opposite either. Gerald asked me about my work with genuine apparent interest, and I talked about the project I was managing, and he nodded in the way people nod when they are waiting for their turn to speak rather than actually hearing. Melissa leaned across the table at one point and said, "That's a gorgeous dress, Naomi," in a tone that did not match the words. I ate my appetizer. I drank my water. I smiled at the appropriate moments. I told myself, this is fine. You are fine. You have survived this table before. The main course arrived, and the temperature of the room shifted. This is the moment I want you to pay attention to, because what happened next was not accidental. I am certain of that now in a way I was only beginning to understand in the room. Patricia cleared her throat. The table quieted in the immediate and total way that tables quiet when the person at the head of them commands silence without asking for it. She said, "I want to take a moment before we get to the birthday celebrations properly." She said it pleasantly, in the voice she used for toasts and announcements, the voice that said what follows is important and will be received accordingly. She said, "Derek has some wonderful news that I think everyone will be excited to hear." I looked at Derek. Derek looked at his mother with an expression that I now understand was the expression of a man who had agreed to something and was only at this moment understanding what he had agreed to. Patricia said, "Derek, why don't you share?" Derek cleared his throat. He said, Yes. Serena and I are engaged." 23 people responded with the sound of 23 people who already knew this information and had been waiting for the official announcement. Not a surprise, then, not for anyone except me. Serena was the woman next to Melissa. She had been there all along, at that table, and I had catalogued her as an unknown face without connecting the specific quality of attention she had been giving me since I walked in to anything in particular. She was blonde. She was the specific kind of attractive that the Harrington family apparently favored. She was, I would later learn, the daughter of a family that Patricia had considered appropriate in the management category. 23 people turned toward Serena with their congratulations. 23 people, or 22, because Derek was looking at his plate, performing the joy of people who are in on something. And I was sitting in the middle of the table at a dinner for Derek's engagement, Having been invited to that dinner, having been told it was a birthday celebration. And I understood in that moment with complete clarity what Patricia had done. She had brought me here to watch. She had brought me here to sit in the audience of the thing she had always wanted for her son, the right woman, the appropriate choice, the managed situation resolved, and to receive the message that I had been the wrong choice all along, that the 4 years of my marriage had been an error that was now being corrected, and that she wanted me to see the correction happen in real time, in a room full of people, with nowhere to go and no way to respond that would not confirm every opinion she had ever held about me. That was the plan. And the worst part, the absolute most devastating part, was that it was working. I felt it working on me. I felt the heat come into my face, the specific heat of humiliation that is different from the heat of anger, that goes deeper, that touches the places where you keep the things you are most afraid of being confirmed. I felt my hands still in my lap. I felt the smile on my face, the practiced smile, the 4 years of practiced smiling rising to the surface like muscle memory. And then Patricia said, "We're so delighted that Serena is joining the family. She's exactly the kind of woman we had always hoped Derek would find." Pause. She looked directly at me. Exactly the kind of woman. The table was doing something extraordinary with its collective attention. Half of it was turned toward Serena, performing celebration. Half of it was watching me, waiting to see what I would do with what had just happened. And I understood with cold clarity that this was the performance Patricia had staged, that she had needed an audience for the moment of my humiliation, because the humiliation without an audience was insufficient, that 23 people in a restaurant on Newbury Street was the size she had needed for the statement she wanted to make. I took a sip of water. I said, "Congratulations, Derek. Congratulations, Serena. I hope you'll be very happy." My voice was even. My face was composed. I gave them nothing. Patricia's smile shifted slightly, not with disappointment, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has successfully forced a person into a position where every option available is a losing one, because she was right. Every option available to me was a losing one. I could stay and endure. I could leave and confirm whatever narrative she wanted to construct about my departure. I could make a scene and confirm the other narrative. I could smile and swallow it, which was what I was doing, which was its own kind of losing because I was swallowing something that should not have to be swallowed. Melissa said from across the table, "It must be strange for you, Naomi, being here, but we did want you to celebrate with us. We always thought of you as family." The use of past tense was so precisely placed that I almost admired it. I looked at Melissa. I said nothing. Gerald said, with his performed warmth, "Naomi, how are things?" "You're still at the architecture firm?" A redirect. A mercy redirect, and I could not decide if it was genuine mercy or performed mercy, and the not knowing was its own exhaustion. I said, "Yes. Things are very well, thank you, Gerald." Patricia was watching me. I was watching the door. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now before this story goes any further. Hit the notification bell so you are here every time a new story drops. And drop your name and your city in the comments below. I want to know where in this world you are watching from tonight. This story is for every woman who has ever sat at a table that was built to be too small for her and smiled and swallowed it. You are not alone. Now stay with me. The second hour was worse. I need to tell you about the second hour because it is where the story lives, in those minutes when I understood what I was dealing with and had not yet found a way through it. The dinner continued. The food was exceptional, which was its own specific irony, that I was being systematically humiliated at an excellent meal. Serena was warm and gracious in a way that I thought might be genuine, which made everything more complicated because I had no appetite for hating a woman who had done nothing to me. She asked me about my work with what seemed like real interest. She said she had always been fascinated by architecture. I told her about the project I was managing. She listened. I was having a civil conversation with my ex-husband's fiance while his mother watched from the head of the table. The evening continued. The second blow came from a direction I had not seen coming. One of the Harrington cousins, a man named Davis, whose last name I had never learned in 4 years of Harrington dinners, which tells you everything about how thoroughly I had been included in this family, was speaking loudly to the man on his left about something that had been in the Boston papers that week. A property deal, a development project in the Seaport District. He said, "I heard the Cole Development Group got the contract. Marcus Cole, you know he's one of those," he stopped. His eyes found me. He finished, one of those new money types. The specific weight of the pause before the finish. The specific word that didn't get said. The specific way his eyes had found me first, connecting dots that he assumed I needed to have connected for me. Marcus's name at this table said in that voice with that pause. I looked at Davis and I said, "Marcus Cole's development work has been extraordinary for the city. I have a professional interest in architecture and I've followed several of his projects closely. Professional, measured, nothing that could be used." Davis looked at me with a slight smile. He said, "Do you know him personally?" I said, "Yes." The table had a specific reaction to this that I felt more than saw, a sharpening of attention, a realignment of interest. Patricia, from the head of the table, "You know Marcus Cole, Naomi?" Her voice was careful, not cold, careful. The care of someone who has just received information that was not in her plan and is deciding what to do with it. I said, "Yes." She said, "Personally?" The word personally asked a question it didn't technically ask. I said, "Yes, Patricia. Personally." She looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled in a way that I found deeply unsettling because it was the smile of someone who had just decided something. She said, "How interesting." She said, "We've met Marcus Cole at various events." She said, "He's quite successful. For someone who came from, well, you know, I did not know." I was being asked to know, to fill in the gap she had left with the specific content she intended, to perform the understanding of the unsaid that would have me agreeing to things I had never agreed to. I did not fill the gap. I said, "He's one of the most exceptional people I know." Patricia looked at me with a new quality of attention. Melissa said brightly from across the table, "Are you two together, Naomi?" I thought I'd heard something. The brightness was a weapon. I said, "Yes." The table adjusted. Patricia said, "Well, that is a surprise." The word surprise carrying the specific weight of not what we would have expected, and therefore let us discuss what we think about it. Gerald said, with his warmth, "Marcus Cole, incredible story. Really remarkable what he's built." He said it in the way white men of his generation sometimes talk about black men who have achieved extraordinary things, with a quality of amazement that is meant to sound like admiration, but contains within it the assumption of unlikeliness, the sense that the achievement is remarkable specifically because of who achieved it. I said, "Yes, he's remarkable." And then Melissa said the thing that was the thing. She said, "You know, Naomi, I think it's just wonderful that you've moved on so well. Honestly, some people really struggle with divorce, especially when, well, it can be very hard on a person's sense of self. And you've really," she paused and smiled, "landed on your feet. Landed on your feet." The phrase placed so precisely. Landing on your feet is what you say about someone who survived something they weren't supposed to survive. It contains within it the assumption of the fall, the assumption of the struggle, the assumption that the outcome was unlikely. It is a compliment that is not a compliment. It is the verbal equivalent of being surprised you made it. I looked at Melissa. She smiled with complete pleasantness. I said nothing. Because what was there to say? What could I say at that table, in that room, with 23 people listening, that would not be the scene Patricia had built all of this to produce? The architecture of the evening had been designed to put me in a position where the only dignified response was silence, and silence was its own kind of losing, and she knew it and had built it knowing it. I was trapped. I was in the most elegant trap I had ever been in, decorated with good food and expensive wine and the pleasant sounds of a family celebration, and the trap was perfect. I picked up my fork. I ate my main course. I was very still. And then the door to the private dining room opened. I want to tell you about the moment the door opened with the same precision I want to tell you about everything else, because precision is what this moment deserves. The door opened and Marcus came through it, and the first thing I noticed, because I always notice first what is wrong before what is right, was that he was 20 minutes late, which was unlike him, because Marcus Cole was never late. And the second thing I noticed was that he was not alone. He had two people with him that I did not recognize. A woman in a dark suit with the brisk efficiency of someone who manages things. A man with a tablet who was clearly there in a professional capacity. And behind all three of them, another man who I recognized from photographs and from the kind of reputation that precedes people into rooms. Thomas Whitfield, who was on the board of three of Boston's major cultural institutions and who was, by any measure, one of the most connected people in the city. Marcus crossed the room to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, quietly, into my hair as he bent to greet me, "I'm sorry I'm late." "Are you all right?" I said. "I am now." He straightened and he looked around the table. 23 people were looking at Marcus Cole. I want to tell you what that looks like. A room of 23 people who were assembled specifically to reduce one person to her smallest possible size, encountering information that requires a complete recalculation of the evening. It looks like a very specific kind of stillness. The kind that precedes the realization that the architecture of the room has changed. Marcus said to the table generally, "I apologize for arriving mid-dinner. I had a meeting that ran long." He said it pleasantly, without explanation or excuse, the way people speak when they are accustomed to not needing to explain. He looked at Derek. He said, "Happy birthday, Derek." He said it with the simple directness of a man who had nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. Derek said, "Thank you." He looked at Patricia. He said, "Patricia, good to see you." Patricia said, "Marcus." What a surprise. She said it the way she said things when she was recalculating, with the pleasant surface intact and something working very hard underneath it. Marcus sat in the empty seat beside me. I noticed this was always the empty seat. The seat beside me that had been empty all evening, as though it had been waiting. I thought about that. I would think about it more later. He said to me, quietly, "Tell me what I missed." I said, "Everything important, I think." He looked at me, and something moved in his eyes that I recognized as the specific look of a man who has paid enough attention to understand what he is looking at. He said, "Okay." And then the evening changed. The change was not dramatic. That is the thing I want you to understand, because stories like this one often go toward the dramatic, toward the confrontation, toward the speech that names everything and the villain who is exposed and the room that gasps and the justice that arrives with appropriate fanfare. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and in some ways more complete. Thomas Whitfield greeted Marcus with the ease of genuine friendship and sat at the other end of the table where there was apparently space. And the woman in the dark suit, whose name I learned was Angela, his chief of staff, took a position near the wall with her tablet, and the table reformed around the new information of Marcus's presence the way tables reform when the gravitational center shifts. Patricia said, after a few minutes of recalibration, "Marcus, I understand you have the seaport contract. That's quite a project." Marcus said, "It is. We're excited about it. The design team is exceptional." He looked at me. "In fact, Naomi has given me some perspectives on the structural elements that have genuinely improved our thinking." I had, in fact, given him those perspectives. It was a real thing he had said. It was also a thing said at a table where my contributions had been consistently minimized, and the specific act of naming my contribution as exceptional in front of that table was not accidental. Patricia said, "How interesting." Marcus looked at her with the pleasant, complete attention of a man who is seeing something clearly and has decided how he feels about it. He said, "Patricia, I want to say something if you don't mind." She said, "Of course." He said, "I've known about Naomi for longer than we've been together. I heard about her work through professional channels. She has a reputation in this city that has been building quietly and steadily for years." He paused. When we met, I had the experience of realizing that a person I had been professionally curious about was also the most interesting person in any room she walked into. And then I had the further experience of learning that she had spent 4 years at a table where that was not recognized, and I have to tell you honestly that I found that remarkable. Not in a complimentary way, the table was quiet. Patricia said, "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Marcus." Marcus said, "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you something." He said it pleasantly, evenly, without heat. The way he said everything that mattered. He said, "I'm telling you that the woman you brought to this dinner tonight to witness your son's engagement as a specific message about her place in the order of things is the woman I am going to marry." He looked at me when he said this, which is how I heard it first as a statement to me and only second as a statement to the table. The room was extremely quiet. I looked at him. He said, "I should have asked you differently." I had a plan and I was going to do it. He checked his watch, actually, in about 10 minutes after Thomas arrived, because I wanted a witness I trusted. But things have clearly moved in a direction I didn't anticipate. He reached into his jacket pocket. 23 people at the table stopped breathing. He set a small box on the table in front of me. He said, "Naomi Grace Washington, I have been paying attention to you since the first moment I was in a room with you. I have seen you be extraordinary in ways that were not acknowledged, and I have watched you carry things without asking for help, and I have been in awe of the specific quality of grace you bring to situations that do not deserve grace." He paused. "I don't want you to bring grace to anything you don't choose to. I want you to be in rooms where your presence is the point. I want to be in those rooms with you for the rest of my life, if you'll allow it." He opened the box. I looked at the ring. I looked at him. I was aware of 23 people watching this, and I made a decision in that moment that was, I think, the most important decision I had made since the Sunday morning in my kitchen when Derek had given me the notification. I decided that this moment was mine, not the table's, not Patricia's, not the audience's. It belonged to me and to Marcus, and to the 4 months of paying attention we had done with each other, and I was not going to perform my response for anyone's benefit. I said, "Yes." Quietly, just to him, he put the ring on my finger. Thomas Whitfield, from the far end of the table, began clapping with the genuine enthusiasm of a man who had apparently been waiting for this and was delighted it had happened. The table, with varying degrees of sincerity and recalibration, followed. I want to tell you about what happened after, because this story does not end at the ring. The ring is not the ending. The ring is a moment in the middle of something larger. Patricia came to me before I left that evening. In the foyer, just the two of us, while Marcus was finishing a conversation with Thomas. She was composed. She was always composed, but something in the composition was different from her usual architectural perfection. She said, "Naomi." I said, "Patricia." She said, "Marcus Cole is a very significant man." I looked at her. She said, "I hope you'll be happy." She said it carefully, choosing each word like she was navigating terrain she was not certain of. I said, "I know what you brought me here for tonight." She was quiet. I said, "I know why my name was on that invitation. I know what the arrangement of the evening was intended to do. I want you to know that I know. Not because I want to create a conflict, but because I think pretending I don't know is one more small thing I'm not going to do anymore." She looked at me with the Harrington eyes that Derek had and Melissa had, that quality of a family that has spent generations being looked at and knowing exactly how to look back. She said, "You're right, I'm sorry." 3 words I had not expected. 3 words that were small and late and delivered without decoration, which somehow made them more than nothing. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "He's going to make you very happy, I think. Marcus. He has the look of a man who has decided something." I said, "Yes, he does." She said, "So did Derek." I was wrong about what that meant for Derek. I may have been wrong about other things too. I looked at Patricia Harrington, This woman who had been the cold weather system of my married life, who had deployed Melissa and silence and careful small cruelties with the precision of someone who had practiced them, and I saw something I had not expected to see. Age, not in the physical sense. The age of someone who has been running a particular program for so long that she has forgotten she chose it, and is only now beginning to wonder what it would feel like to stop. I said, "I think we're done here, Patricia." She nodded. I walked to where Marcus was waiting, and he put his hand in mine, and we left. Now I need to tell you the twist, the real one, the one that reframes everything you have heard so far. 3 weeks after the dinner, I was at Marcus's office for a lunch meeting. He had started including me in certain business conversations, not because I was his fiance, but because my architectural background was genuinely useful, and he was not the kind of man who wasted useful things. And I was early, and his assistant was away from the desk, and I sat in the reception area, and I picked up a magazine from the table that was open to a profile piece. The profile was about Marcus Cole. I had read profiles of him before, early in our relationship, the research you do when you want to understand someone. But this was a different piece, more personal, a long-form interview from a publication I respected. I read it. About 2/3 of the way through, there was a section about his background. He had grown up in Atlanta, the article said, single mother, working-class neighborhood, father who had left early. He had started working at 16, saved money with the kind of discipline that comes from understanding that discipline is the only substitute for a safety net. First property at 26, company at 28. Standard success story in structure, not standard in experience. And then this. The article said that Marcus had, in his late 20s, been in a serious relationship that had ended because of family pressure. Hers, not his. Her family had not considered him appropriate. He had been shown a door, he told the interviewer, in a way that was polite and complete, and that had cost him something he had spent years rebuilding from. He said, "I spent a lot of time after that making sure I understood the difference between people who were impressed by what I'd built and people who were interested in who I was." He said, "Those are not the same group of people." He said, "When I found someone in the second group, I paid attention." I sat in that reception area with the magazine in my hands. He had been on the other side of this table. Not the same table, not the same family, but the same architecture. The same careful, polite removal from a room where he was not considered the right fit. The same experience of understanding that a door you were shown was a door someone had decided you didn't belong behind. He had been that person. And then he had become the person who walked through a door 23 people didn't expect and changed the temperature of the room. And he had told me in the sculptor auction the first night, "I'm an unusual person." And he had meant, "I have been where you have been. And I have been paying attention ever since to the people who were there too." I put the magazine down. He came through the reception area door and stopped when he saw my face. He said, "You read it." I said, "You left it there." He said, "Yes." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Because it wasn't mine to make part of our story. It's my past. Not the point of what we are now." I said, "It's exactly the point of what we are now." He looked at me. I said, "You understood what that dinner was going to be. You understood it before I did. That's why you arranged to arrive when you did. That's why Thomas Whitfield was there. That's why the empty seat was beside me all evening. He said, I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I suspected. And yes, I wanted to be there before it went further than you should have to endure. I said, you should have told me. He said, you're right, I should have. I made a calculation that you would want to handle it yourself as long as you could, and I wanted to respect that. And I miscalculated the timing. I said, yes, you did. He said, I'm sorry. I looked at him. He said, I know you can handle any room. I know you don't need me to rescue anything. I wasn't there to rescue you. I was there because you should not have to be alone in a room like that when there is a person who loves you in the world who knows where you are. I thought about that. I thought about my mother, who had raised me to handle things. I thought about 4 years of handling the Harrington table alone. I thought about 14 months of rebuilding alone. I thought about being alone at the table for 2 hours with the full weight of Patricia's architecture pressed against me. And I thought about the door opening. I said, I need you to understand something. I am not a woman who needs to be handled or managed or protected from rooms. I have walked into every hard room in my life, and I have walked out of the other side every time. He said, I know, I said, but I am going to be your wife. And a wife is not someone you leave in a room that you know is designed to diminish her and show up only when the diminishment has reached a certain level. He said, you're right. Completely. I said, if you know what a room is going to be, you tell me, and we decide together. Agreed? He said, agreed. I said, good. He said, are we all right? I said, yes, we are all right. But Marcus, he said, yes. I said, the seat that was empty beside me all evening. Did you call ahead? He looked at me with the look I had come to know, the one that meant he was deciding how much to confirm. He said, I may have called the restaurant. I said, you had the seat held. He said, I had the seat held. I looked at him. Then I started to laugh. Not with amusement exactly. With the specific emotional release of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has set it down and found something unexpected underneath it. He laughed too. We stood in his reception area and laughed, and it was the best sound I had heard in months. I want to tell you about the lesson, because this story has one, and it is not the one you might think. The lesson is not, find a wealthy man and let him walk through a door and change the room. That is not the lesson, and I would be doing you a disservice if I told you that was the lesson. The lesson is this. The rooms that are built to be too small for you are built by people who are afraid of what happens when you are full-sized. Patricia Harrington spent 4 years making a room too small for me because she was afraid of what I represented, afraid of what my presence in her family meant about the architecture she had spent a lifetime maintaining. The smallness was not about me. It was about her fear. And the other lesson, the one that lives underneath the first one, you cannot spend your whole life avoiding the rooms that were built small. You have to walk into them, not to prove something to the people who built them. To prove something to yourself. To discover that the room is small and that you are not, and that those are two separate facts, and that only one of them is about you. I walked into that restaurant on Newberry Street in October because I had done 14 months of rebuilding and I needed to know if the rebuilding was solid. And I found out that it was because when Patricia said exactly the kind of woman, I did not collapse. I did not perform. I held still, and I held my sighs, and I waited. And I found out something else, which is that walking into the room alone and walking into the room with someone who has held the seat beside you are both brave, and neither one cancels out the other. Needing someone is not weakness. Letting someone in is not weakness. Letting someone hold the seat beside you, after years of sitting alone in rooms that were designed to shrink you, is not weakness. It is the hardest kind of courage. The kind that requires you to believe you deserve the seat and the person in it simultaneously. I had done the work to deserve both, so had he. Marcus and I were married 11 months after the dinner at Mason Laurent, not at a Harrington event, not at a charity auction or a society venue. At my church in Mattapan, the church my grandmother had attended and my mother had attended, and where I had been baptized at 3 weeks old. The church was small and the music was enormous, and my mother cried from the moment she walked in until the moment we left. Marcus's mother, who had raised him alone in Atlanta and who was one of the most formidable and warm people I had ever met, held my hands before the ceremony and said, "He has been looking for you his whole life. I want you to know I see you. I want you to know I see you." I held those words the way I hold things that matter most, carefully, without letting them go. Thomas Whitfield was there. Angela, his chief of staff, was there. My colleagues from the architecture firm were there. My friends who had been present for the rebuilding were there, the ones who had sat with me on my apartment floor in the first weeks after the divorce and had not said it will be okay because they were smart enough to know that okay was not the right word, and that what I needed was not reassurance but presence. Patricia Harrington was not there. She had sent a gift. A beautiful one, chosen with care, which I interpreted as the communication of a woman who was in the middle of something she had not yet arrived at the other side of. I sent a handwritten note of thanks, because I was raised to acknowledge generosity when it arrived, even when it arrived late. Derek was not there. He and Serena were, according to mutual acquaintances, genuinely happy, which I believed because I had no reason not to, and because their happiness was not in competition with mine. Melissa was not there. I did not think about Melissa. Gerald sent a card with a handwritten note that said, "Naomi, you are a remarkable woman. We were very lucky to know you." The "we" was interesting. I put the card in my box. I am going to tell you about my life now, not because wealth is the point of this story, but because what the life looks like is relevant to the lesson, and I want you to have the full picture. I still work at the architecture firm. This surprises people who expect that marriage to Marcus changed that, and it did change certain things. I lead the division now, a promotion that was already in motion and that arrived 6 months after our wedding, and the projects I work on are larger and more significant, and I am given the kind of resources I had been requesting for 3 years, and that had been delayed for reasons that made sense in the budget but less sense in context. The work is exceptional. It is the best work I have done. Marcus and I live in a house in the South End, 2 blocks from my old apartment, which I kept because I love the South End, and I was not going to perform displacement as evidence of arrival. The house is large and full of light and has a room that is specifically for the books I keep buying faster than I can read them, and which Marcus teases me about with the specific teasing of someone who is also buying books faster than he can read them. The sculpture is on the bookshelf. The one he won at the auction to have an excuse to talk to me. It is the first thing I see every morning when I drink my coffee by the window. I think about my mother, who worked 2 jobs in Mattapan to give me the private school education and the professional foundation and the specific quality of spine that made it possible for me to sit at the Harrington table for 4 years and not become smaller. I think about what that cost her and what it built in me, and how those two things are not separate. I think about Patricia's words, exactly the kind of woman, and I think about what kind of woman I actually am, which is the kind who was raised by someone extraordinary in a community that was dismissed by people who didn't understand it, who built her career from the ground up, who left a marriage that wasn't working with her dignity intact, who rebuilt herself and fell in love again and said yes to a ring in a restaurant on Newberry Street with 23 people watching and felt the yes as entirely her own. That is the kind of woman I am. Exactly. I need to say something now about the dinner. About what I think it was and what I think it wasn't. I think Patricia Harrington organized that dinner from a specific place of fear, the same fear I described earlier, the fear of what my presence in her family meant about the world she had built and maintained. I think the fear was real even though the behavior it produced was not acceptable. I think she is a woman who has been the architect of a very specific room for a very long time and has not yet fully understood what it has cost the people who were managed out of it. I do not think she is a monster. I want to be clear about that because this story deserves accuracy even when accuracy is complicated. I think she is a woman who made choices that caused harm and who is, slowly and privately, doing the accounting of those choices. The gift she sent, the apology in the foyer, brief and insufficient and genuine. These are the beginnings of an accounting. Whether she arrives at the full account is not something I am owed and not something I am waiting for. I have my life. It is full and large and mine. I do not need her accounting to complete it, but I hold space for it. I hold space for the possibility that people can look at the architecture of what they have built and decide to build differently. I hold that space because my grandmother taught me to, because she said, "Baby, when you stop holding space for people to be better, you stop believing in the possibility of better, and once you stop believing in that possibility, you've given up something you can't afford to give up." I am not giving it up. Here is the broader message, the one underneath all of the specific story. There are rooms in this world that have been built to be too small for certain people. Built deliberately, with precision, by people who understood exactly what they were doing. These rooms have names and addresses and long histories. They are sitting rooms and boardrooms and dining rooms and family tables. They are institutions and neighborhoods and industries and social circles. They are anywhere that someone decided that a particular kind of person was not the right fit and then constructed an architecture to enforce that decision. If you have spent time in one of these rooms, if you have eaten at one of these tables, if you have smiled the practiced smile and swallowed the things that should not have to be swallowed, I want to say something to you directly. You were never the right size for that room. You were always the right size. The room was built wrong. And the work, the real work, the hardest work, is not convincing the people who built the room that it was wrong. They may or may not arrive at that on their own. The real work is refusing to let the room's dimensions become your dimensions. Refusing to let someone else's architecture be your autobiography. You are not the size of the room they put you in. You never were. I am 34 years old and I am sitting in the house in the South End with my coffee and the morning light and the sculpture on the bookshelf. And Marcus is in the kitchen making breakfast, which he does on Saturday mornings with the focused pleasure of someone who likes making things. And I can hear him moving around in there, and I can smell the coffee going, and outside the window the South End is doing its Saturday morning thing, unhurried and specific and mine. This is my life. I built it. Not from nothing. I had my mother and my grandmother and my education and my work. Not alone. I have Marcus and my friends and my community. But I built it. From what I was given and from what I made of what I was given and from the specific decision made at a kitchen table on a Sunday morning 14 months before October 12th, to receive a hard thing with my full self intact and walk out of the other side and rebuild. I did that. And when the door to Mason Laurent opened on October 12th and Marcus walked through it, it was not rescue. It was arrival. The arrival of someone who had been paying attention and had held the seat and was walking through the door at the moment I needed the door to open, not because I could not have survived the room without him. I was surviving the room without him, but because surviving a room alone and having someone hold the seat beside you are both real and both matter, and I had done enough surviving alone. I was ready for the seat. I was ready for the person in it. I was ready for this life. If you have stayed with this story all the way to the end, I need you to hear this last thing before you go. You are not Patricia's opinion of you. You are not the table that was built to be too small. You are not the 4-year marriage that ended before it should have and after it should have. You are not the land on your feet compliment, or the exactly the kind of woman comment, or the years of practiced smiling and swallowing. You are the person who walks into the hard room anyway. You are the person who holds still while the architecture of the room tries to redefine you. You are the person who says yes quietly, just for herself, in a restaurant on Newberry Street with 23 people watching. You are already the right size. Don't let anyone measure you smaller. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now. Hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. And drop your name and your city in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Tell me if you have ever sat at a table that was built to be too small for you. Tell me if you smiled and swallowed it. Tell me if you made it out the other side. This community sees you, every single one of you. Drop a in the comments if you have ever been the woman in that room. Drop a if you have ever held the seat for someone. Drop a if you believe that the rooms built to be small can be changed by the people who walk into them at full size. Next week on Black Diamonds, a woman who spent 12 years as the silent partner behind her husband's company, who drafted the proposals and managed the clients and built the relationships while his name was on the door, who discovered, on the morning he asked for a divorce, that she had been classified as an employee rather than a founder. What she found in the founding documents. What she did with what she found. And the board meeting that nobody in that room will ever forget. That story is coming. Make sure your notifications are on, because what she does next changes everything. Until then, This is black diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you.